Girl, you got some nerve about being mad about him flirting with somebody else when you sleeping with this whole other woman's man. Hey y'all, welcome back to my channel. My name is Janae, if you didn't know, and today's video is another true crime episode. So if you're ready, let's go. Alright y'all, so nail check. Where we at? There we go. Y'all, when I did this set, I really had no idea, no inspiration, no clue what I was about to do. All I knew is that I wanted it to be Christmas themed, and the easiest thing that I could do was candy canes. So that's how we got here. But yeah, so today we're going to be talking about Derrick Todd Lee. And y'all, I really just don't understand how I've never heard of this man until I started doing research for this case. I just don't understand. And I'm telling y'all, maybe I'm on the late train. Maybe I missed the first one, but I know I ain't never heard of this man. Nonetheless, I did my research. I've learned about him, and now I'm going to share with y'all. So, Derrick Todd Lee was born on November 5th, 1968 in St. Francisville, Louisiana. And from the beginning, Derrick had it pretty rough. He was born to a dad who suffered with bipolar disorder and also suffered from bouts of psychosis. And he would never be a main part of Derrick's life. He was more or less an in and out type of dad. And at some point he would end up just not coming back into Derrick's life because he ended up being sent to prison for the attempted murder of his ex-wife. So yeah, and Derrick really didn't have it too much better with his mom because she would end up marrying a man who was abusive to Derrick. And she married him when Derrick was really young. And so from about the age of 3, this man was abusing Derrick. And his mom did nothing. She didn't intervene in any type of way. And me personally, I don't understand that because when my kids be getting fussed at by their daddy, I be looking at him sideways like, don't yell at my kids, but discipline the kids because they your kids too. But like, so I couldn't even imagine someone who's not even their dad coming in and physically abusing them, and I just stand by. But then again, I also understand the other side of that she might have been an abused woman. So she might have been scared to say something. But whatever her reasoning was, she never really stood up for her son. And because of this, Derrick ended up feeling unprotected by the person who was supposed to protect him the most. And in turn, he started to seek that love, comfort, guidance, and protection outside of the home when he was in school. And some of his teachers noted that he would get picked on a lot because he would suck his thumb and he would also call his teachers mama. So like I said, he was seeking that comfort outside of the home. And on top of sucking his thumb and calling his teacher mama, kids will also make fun of Derrick because he wasn't as bright as the other students. He had some developmental delays and had to be put in special ed classes because of it. And like I said, this just made the kids make fun of him even more. So I guess it's safe to say that Derrick probably didn't have too many friends. And so he had to figure out a way to have fun by himself without nobody else. And this fun for him came in the form of watching people. And I'm not talking about like how some people do where they sit on a park bench or sit in a mall or something like that and watch the people go by and talk shit about them. That's not what I'm talking about. He liked to sneak and creep and peep on people. And he decided to start with the people closest to him, the people in his family. And when Derrick was just 7 years old, he got caught peeping in on his cousin. Now, I don't know if this cousin was a male or a female cousin. I would assume that it was a female based off of the things that Derrick goes on to do in this case. But yeah, he got caught peeping in on one of his cousins. And I don't know who caught him or what the punishment was for this, or even if there was a punishment for it. But I would assume that since he was in an abusive household that he probably got a whooping. But whatever his punishment or lack thereof was, it wasn't enough to stop Derrick from doing what he was doing. And in fact, his behavior actually got worse because over the course of the next couple of years, Derrick would end up getting into quite a bit of trouble. So in 1981, when Derrick was just 13 years old, he would get caught beating up a woman and robbing a candy store. And he ended up being arrested. I don't know if he was charged with the battery of the woman. I'm not 100% sure on that one. But I do know that he was arrested and charged with vandalism and robbery for the candy store. And from then on, he would be in and out of jail all throughout his teens for an array of different things. Assault, vandalism, robbery. But when he was 20 years old in 1988, he met a woman named Jacqueline Sims. And the two of them would go on to get married. And Derrick would follow in his dad and stepdad's footsteps and become abusive to Jacqueline. And when her dad confronted him about putting his hands on his daughter, Derrick reportedly threatened her dad with a gun. And unfortunately, Jacqueline wouldn't have her dad for much longer to defend her or at least try to take up for her, because he would end up being killed in a tragic work accident where the building that he was working in blew up and he lost his life in the explosion. And due to her dad passing away in the explosion, Jacqueline would end up receiving a lump sum of money due to a lawsuit that was filed against, I don't know, the building owner. I don't know who the lawsuit was filed against, but nonetheless, the lawsuit was won and Jacqueline was the recipient of a large lump sum of money. And even though it was Jacqueline money, Derrick didn't mind helping himself to it at all. And now that he felt like he had a little bit of money, it wasn't nothing stopping him from being even more unfaithful to Jacqueline than he had already been. He had started whining and dining and pretty much treating all kinds of women on his wife's dime. And it said that Derrick was a very charming young man. Like, he was a smooth talker, he dressed nice, he was just real smoothness. So he never had a problem getting women, but the money was a bonus. But even with all the money, cars, clothes, and hoes that Derrick had, none of that was really satisfying to him. But you know what did satisfy him though? Watching women who didn't know they was being watched. He was still a peeping Tom. And pretty soon, the thrill that he once got from being a peeping Tom wasn't as thrilling as it once was. And so Derrick decided to step it up a notch. And in April of 1993, Derrick and his wife, I'm guessing, and their 2 kids, had left St. Francisville and moved to Zachary, Louisiana. And it was here that he decided to elevate his crimes. So, like I said, it's April 1993, and Derrick is in a cemetery watching a couple named Michelle Chapman and her boyfriend, we don't know his name, make out in their car. Now, I'm not sure why they was in a cemetery making out, but they were, and Derrick was there too, and he was watching them. He was getting a kick out of watching them make out, thinking that they were alone. And I don't know how long he was watching them before he decided to launch his attack, but he did end up attacking the couple with a hack blade. He just swung their door open, and as they making out, he just started to attack them. But luckily there was a patrolman who was in the area, and he saw the dome light of this couple's car on, and he wanted to know, like, why is y'all here, what's going on? And so he started going towards where this car was, and Derrick saw that the police officer was approaching, and so he ended up just grabbing the keys out of the car and fleeing off into the woods, into the distance, and he just left them there to die. Thankfully though, because of this cop's interference, the 2 of them were still alive when he found them. But he wasn't worried about the suspect or the perpetrator who had run off. He was more worried about getting this couple some help. And thankfully, they were helped in enough time to save both of their lives. And Michelle and her boyfriend were both very traumatized by this experience. So much so that the boyfriend, he said he's not talking about it. He don't want to talk about it. He don't want to think about it. He just want to put it all out of his mind. But Michelle, after she recovered, she wanted to do any and everything that she could do to help detectives figure out who did this to them. And so Michelle was in contact with an officer named David McDavid, and he was right by her side as she helped the sketch artist to create a composite sketch of their suspect. And even though they had this description and composite sketch of the perpetrator, they was never able to capture their suspect. And essentially, Derrick had just gotten away with his first known attack. And because he got away with it, he just kept on going. And over the course of the next 4 years, he would continuously have run-ins with the law. But these were always just minor offenses, but nothing that would keep him in jail for a long periodically time. But in July of 1997, police would end up getting a phone call about a man peeping in a woman's window. And I don't know if the caller was the woman herself or if it was a neighbor who saw someone peeping into this woman's window. But the police do end up getting this call. And as they show up to the location where this lady says she saw a peeping Tom, they actually see this man run off into the cemetery. This man is Derrick. And they know that there's an entrance or exit on the other side of the cemetery if you cut straight through. And so they felt like he was going to run through the cemetery, and they were right. And so they went around to the other side, and sure enough, they caught him as he was running out of the cemetery. And the officer who ends up catching Derrick running out of the cemetery is Officer David McDavid, the same officer who 4 years prior helped Michelle create a composite sketch of her attacker. And he don't know it yet, but this is his first time coming face to face with that composite sketch. So anyways, he arrests Derrick on the peeping Tom offense. And I don't know if Derrick was in jail from the time of his arrest in July of 1997 until he was sentenced in January of 1998. But whether he was or he wasn't, in January of 98, he was only sentenced to 2 years of probation for his peeping Tom offense. So he essentially didn't have to serve any jail time for it. And so he was essentially a free man, and they really just should have locked his ass up and threw away the key. However, that's not what happened. And on April 18th, 1998, Derrick was able to commit his first confirmed murder. So, like I said, it's April 18th, 1998, and Randy Meebro's 3-year-old son will be found outside by one of her neighbors, walking around saying that he was looking for his mom. And so this neighbor walked Randy's son back to her house, and when she got there, she noticed that there was no sign of Randy at all and that there was blood everywhere. And so she immediately called the police, and they conducted the investigation, and they were not able to find Randy either. However, they were able to collect a couple of pieces of evidence from her home, and it was very clear that foul play was involved. And so now detectives have to investigate Randy's disappearance. Now, they're investigating it as a disappearance, but it's looking like she is no longer alive. And so now the same officer who was involved in the cemetery attack and in the Peeping Tom incident, he is now a detective, and he is assigned to Randy's case. And right away, he had an inkling that Derrick was responsible for this. And it didn't help that Derrick didn't live too far away from Randy's house. And so he was naturally a part of the suspect pool. Even if Detective McDavid didn't have that inkling, he would have naturally been a part of the suspect pool because of his proximity to Randy. So the detective went over to Derrick's house to do standard questioning just to see if he knew who Randy was, if he had ever seen her, if they talked, when was the last time they talked, yada, 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 you know, stuff like that. And so Derrick is being very cooperative. He answers all of the questions. And like I said, he's just being very cooperative. And so Detective McDavid is like, okay, well, you being this cooperative, do you mind if I search your home? And Derrick was like, sure, go ahead. No problem. I don't have any issue with that. And so Detective McDavid starts to search Derrick's home with Derrick really close behind him, to the point where the detective was like, okay, bro, back up off me. You're a little too close and I don't like that. And so the detective continues on with his search. And as he's getting close to a closet and I think a bedroom maybe, Derrick decided to call off the search. And because this was a consent to search without a search warrant, Detective McDavid had to stop when Derrick said stop. He couldn't continue on, otherwise it would have then been illegal. And so he found that kind of weird, but he didn't have another choice, so he stopped the search. So now back at Randy's house, they note that her car and her car keys are both missing. And so they presumed that Randy's attacker had taken her own car to move her body. And while the detective felt like Derrick had something to do with it, he couldn't ignore the fact that Randy was also recently divorced. And so they had to question her ex-husband. And so they questioned him and give him a polygraph test. And it don't really help that he failed the polygraph test, but even though he failed, they didn't have any solid evidence that connected him to the crime, or Derrick either. And after extensive searching, they were unable to locate Randy or her car, and unfortunately, the case of Randy Meebro went cold. So throughout the course of working Randy's case and feeling like Derrick might have played a part in her disappearance, Detective McDavid started to kind of realize, like, his face, I know I've dealt with him over the years, but his face looked real familiar from way back when. And he realizes that the sketch from the cemetery attack looks oddly similar to Derrick. And so because of this, he gets Michelle and he puts a photo lineup in front of her with Derrick inside of that photo lineup somewhere. And she picks him out without hesitation. She said, this is him. This is the man that attacked me. And I don't have any doubt this is him. Now, mind you, it's 1999 at this point. It's been 6 years since the attack, but Michelle is not stuttering over her words or nothing. She knows that this is the man who attacked her. So Detective David McDavid, he is stoked. He happy. He geeked. He like, listen, if I can't get him locked up for Randy Meebro, I'm gonna get him locked up for this, because he does not need to be out here on these streets. And while he locked up for this, I can do a little bit more digging and investigating and find something that links him to Randy's case, right? That's what he was thinking. And so he ends up drawing up a warrant for Derrick's arrest as it relates to the cemetery attack. But when he went to go get it signed by the judge was like, Ooh, I'm so sorry. The statute of limitation is 5 years. He had come to this realization a year too late. And so Derrick would remain a free man. But he wasn't going to keep escaping jail for too much longer, because in the year 2000, Derrick was still out here. He liked to go to bars, drink, party, and have a good time. And one particular time, while he's at a bar with his girlfriend, mind you, he's still married, he was getting a little flirtatious with some of the other women in the bar. And his girlfriend wasn't too happy about that. And so she confronted him like, I know you're not out here flirting with all these women when I'm right here. I'm sitting right here. You gonna do this in my face? Now, I don't know if the girlfriend knew he was married, but if she did, girl, you got some nerve about being mad about him flirting with somebody else when you sleeping with this whole other woman's man. Like, I hope she didn't know, but if she did, the audacity. So anyways, Derrick didn't like his girlfriend confronting him about flirting with other women. And so he ended up beating her up in the parking lot of the bar. And he obviously didn't care who was around or who saw him, because he did this in front of a bunch of people. And they called the police, and Derrick ended up being arrested for the physical assault of his girlfriend. And this arrest was a direct violation of his probation. Because remember, he's still on probation from the whole peeping Tom thing. Remember, he got 2 years of probation? Yeah, that hadn't expired yet. That hadn't run its course yet. And so because of this assault and violating his probation, Derrick would finally spend some time in prison. It was only a year, but at least he was locked up. And when he got out, he decided that he needed a change of scenery. So he moved from Zachary, Louisiana to Baton Rouge, Louisiana. And Baton Rouge is only about 16 miles away from Zachary, about 20-minute drive. So he didn't really go that far, but he went just far enough so that the police didn't know him by name. So it's September 2001 now, and Derrick has not changed one bit. And Derrick begins to look for and or stalk his next victim, 40-year-old Gina Wilson Green. So 2 days before Gina was attacked by Derrick, she told her mom that she felt like somebody was watching her. She just felt like she was being watched. She didn't know why she felt like that. She didn't know who she thought was watching her. She just had a feeling that she was being watched. And based off of Derrick's history and what he goes on to do to Gina, I don't think she was wrong. And on September 23rd, 2001, Derrick would somehow gain entry into Gina's home, where he would attack her. She was beaten, strangled, and sexually assaulted and left there in her bed, where she would be found 2 days later by a co-worker who had become concerned when she didn't show up to work. And just like in Randy's case back in Zachary, there were no leads, there was nothing. And so essentially Derrick had gotten away with murder once again. And in January of 2002, Derrick claimed his next victim, a woman by the name of Geraldine DeSoto. She was stabbed to death in her home, and she was found by her husband a couple hours later. Now, this wasn't the Baton Rouge police's first time hearing the DeSoto name, because there had been a couple of domestic disturbance calls regarding Geraldine and her husband. And with the police knowing this and knowing their history, Geraldine's husband became the #1 suspect. And as always, they did an intense investigation on him, but they just could never find any proof that he did it. However, in the court of public opinion and around the Baton Rouge Police Department, everybody just felt like Geraldine's husband did this. And because they felt so strongly that Geraldine's husband was their guy, they never connected Geraldine and Gina's murders, even though there were so many similarities. But after the murder of a woman named Charlotte Murray Pace, all of that was about to change. She was found stabbed to death in her home in May of 2002. And during the investigation into Charlotte's murder, they realized that she didn't live too far from where Gina Green lived, and she was a recent LSU graduate, which was the same school that Geraldine DeSoto was attending when she was murdered. And so with all of these facts combined, this got the investigators thinking like, maybe, just maybe, there's a connection between these cases. And if that's the case, we have a serial killer on our hands. And they were indeed correct. They did have a serial killer on their hands. And as hard as they tried, they just could not catch this man. And so what do serial killers do when they haven't been caught? They keep killing. And on July 12th, 2002, when a woman named Pam Kennemore was coming home from work, probably exhausted from her day, she accidentally left the keys in her door and went in the house to unwind, just wash the day off and take a bath. And while she was in the bath, Derrick entered her home and kidnapped her. And it was unclear to me if he attacked her before he kidnapped her or if he just kidnapped her. But what I do know is that he took a naked Pam, put her into his truck, and drove her away from her house. Now, while Derrick was stopped at a red light after kidnapping Pam, a woman who was driving saw Pam, and she said that Pam gave her a look, and it was a look of desperation. It looked like this woman was trying to plead with her eyes. And so this lady in the other car, she called the police and she was able to give a partial license plates of the car that she had seen. But she didn't end up following them, so she didn't know where they ended up. But there was another 911 call, and this 911 call came in from a man who was driving an 18-wheeler. And he said that as he was driving, he just so happened to look down, and in this truck that he looked down at was a naked woman. And that kind of startled him, and so he called the police. Unfortunately, though, police were unable to locate Derrick's truck in time, and Derrick ended up driving Pam to a wooded area where he carried out a sexual assault on her and he stabbed her to death. And Pam's body would end up being found 4 days later by a fisherman. So after the discovery of Pam Kennemore's body, this is now the fourth murder victim in Baton Rouge in this short amount of time. And the city is on edge. Everybody is scared. Women are scared for themselves. Husbands are scared for their wives. And now they're almost 100% certain that there's a serial killer out here. And they just don't know when he's going to strike next. And this is really putting the pressure on the police force to find this killer. And so thankfully, there have been some developments in DNA technology. And DNA that was found at 3 of the crime scenes was tested. And it came back that all 3 of those DNA samples matched each other. So they knew that the person who had killed Pam Kennemore was the same person who killed Charlotte Murray Pace and Gina Wilson Green. And while this was a great leap forward, they still didn't have a person to match the DNA with. And as we all know, you can have DNA samples all day, but if you don't have a person to compare it to, you'll never know who it belongs to. However, even though they didn't have a person to try to match the DNA with, they did kind of have an idea of the description of the person. Because throughout the investigation of Charlotte and Gina's murders, a couple of tips had come in, and those tips said that they seen a white male in a white pickup truck. So they knew that they was looking for a white man in a white pickup truck. The only problem with that was that they wasn't looking for no white man. Now, how they got white man from this, I don't know. But that was the tip. So at this point, Baton Rouge decided to get other agencies involved, and they also invited other parishes to bring forward some of their unsolved murder cases to see if there were any similarities between those. And Zachary Police Department decided that they would present some of their unsolved cases to this task force. And so Detective David McDavid goes to this task force meeting with Baton Rouge and other parishes and other cities, and he presents Randy Meebro's case. And he says, okay, so these are the details of the case. They align with the cases that y'all have right here, and this is my suspect. And then he showed them a picture of Derrick. But once they saw the picture of Derrick, Baton Rouge Police Department was like, stop right there. I'm so sorry. Yes, there are similarities in these cases. However, our guy is a white guy in a white pickup truck. This is a black guy. They can't be, they're not the same. And so with that, Derrick was dismissed as a suspect for the Baton Rouge killings. But had they listened to Detective David McDavid? Unfortunately, though, that wasn't the case. And so Detective David McDavid went back to Zachary, but he was still pretty confident that Derrick was at least his guy. Even if it wasn't their guy, he still felt like Derrick was his guy. But back in Baton Rouge, they was on the hunt. They was on the hunt for this white man in this white pickup truck. So they was out here pulling over white pickup trucks with white men driving them left and right. And they was swabbing their cheeks, and they was testing them all against this DNA sample that they had. And while they was out here swabbing and searching for this white man, Derrick was free to continue on with his killing spree. And in November of 2002, Derrick would attack a woman named Trenisha Cullum while she was out visiting her mom's gravesite. And Trenisha's body would be found 4 days later in the woods near Lafayette, Louisiana. And when they found Trenisha, DNA was able to be collected from her body, and it did indeed match the DNA from their other crimes. And Baton Rouge police knew that their killer had struck once again. And sadly, Trenisha would not be Derrick's final victim, because on March 3rd, 2003, Derrick kidnapped a woman by the name of Carrie Yoder from her apartment, and she was beaten, sexually assaulted, and murdered, and her body was left in Whiskey Bay, where she would be found 10 days later. And once they found her, they realized that where she was in Whiskey Bay wasn't too far from where Pam Kennemore had been found. And so they had the speculation right off bat that this was going to be their serial killer, who by now they had dubbed the Ghost of Baton Rouge. And after being in Whiskey Bay for 10 days, they wasn't that hopeful that they would find DNA on Carrie. However, they were able to collect a DNA sample that was viable, and to nobody's surprise, it linked Carrie's murder to the previous murders. And like I told y'all before, the city of Baton Rouge was already on edge after the 4th murder. So after the 6th one, they were in shambles at this point. Families of all of these victims was mad, frustrated, irritated, hurt, disappointed in the police for not being able to catch him. The city was mad at the police for not being able to catch him. The police was mad at the police for not being able to catch him. Everybody wanted this man locked up, and they wanted him locked up yesterday. So during this whole frenzy to find the murderer, a genetics expert offered his services. He told them that he could get a better, more accurate description of their killer based off of his DNA. And he said that he can give them a definite on the race. And mind y'all, this is when DNA technology was still fairly new. The Baton Rouge police was like, bullshit, no you can't. That's not possible. But since you said you could do it, let's see what you can do. And so what they ended up doing was they gave this man a couple of dummy samples, probably from people around the office, people who they actually knew the race of, you know, just knew the description of, and gave these DNA samples to this genetics expert. And 10 for 10, he got every race right, descriptions, all that. He did what he said he could do. And so they were like, oh, okay, well, here is the sample of our serial killer. Tell us what it says. And when the detectives got the results of this DNA analysis, baby, they draws was shocked, because they found out that their suspect was not a white man. This man had 85% African DNA. So after receiving this analysis and realizing that their suspect was in fact a black man, they started going through a couple of the other cases that they had. They realized that a woman named Diane Alexander, who had survived a similar attack in her home, might have been attacked by their serial killer. And Diane's attack happened 3 days before Pam Kennemore was murdered. It happened at her home in Bow Bridge, Louisiana. And during the attack, her son came home and scared the attacker away. And because she survived her attack, she was able to give a description of her attacker. But again, at the time, they believed their murderer was a white man. So when she said that they was black, they was like, oh, this is something separate. They didn't think that it was connected in any way. So with their new discovery, the police had to tell the city that they was wrong. They had to tell them that they were not looking for a white man in a white pickup truck, but instead a black man in a white pickup truck. And when I tell you, the city was pissed. The people were mad. Because how did y'all get this wrong? How? And I mean, I get it. I would be pissed too. But in the police's defense, they were going off of the tips that they received. But nonetheless, they also had to spin the block on Zachary PD's suspect. So this is what they did. They said, your suspect kind of looked like the composite sketch that Diane had drawn up. And so we gonna get a warrant for his DNA. And so in May of 2003, they went to Derrick's house and got a sample of his DNA. And they sent it back to the lab to be tested. And it took 3 weeks for the results to come back. And it was Derrick, duh. But do y'all think Derrick was still there when they went to arrest him? Do y'all think Derrick was still at his house in Baton Rouge when they went to arrest him? No. As soon as they left from getting that DNA swab, Derrick hit the highway and headed to Atlanta. Luckily though, on May 27, 2003, he was captured before he was able to claim any more lives, and he was shipped right on back to Louisiana. And while he was sitting in jail, the detectives wanted to collect as much evidence as possible, just in case he decided to plead not guilty and they had to go to trial. They really wanted to ensure a conviction. And so they searched his home, and during this search, they found multiple items of all the victims. And they found that Derrick liked to take souvenirs of his victims, and more often than not, in Derrick's case, that souvenir was keys. And they also tested his DNA against some of the other unsolved murders in the area, and they found that he was the murderer of Geraldine DeSoto and of Randy Mebro. And so Detective David McDavid, his intuition, it was right all along from the beginning. So as prosecutors are getting ready to hand Derrick his ass at trial, his defense attorneys say, pump your brakes. My man's IQ is way too low for him to try to be going to trial, okay? He's not going to understand what's going on. He's not going to understand the charges against him. No. But the judge was like, you pump your brakes, because your man's might have a low IQ, but he's not dumb. He was smart enough to know that what he was doing was wrong, because he was smart enough to know to try to cover up his crimes. If he didn't think he was doing nothing wrong, he wouldn't have tried to cover him up, and he wouldn't have tried to get away with it for as long as he did. So he can go to trial. Thank you. And so in August of 2004, he went to trial for the murder of Geraldine DeSoto, and he was found guilty on second-degree murder, and he was sentenced to life in prison. But the people wasn't happy. they didn't want him to have life in prison. They was trying to take this man's head off, okay? And so in September of 2004, he went back to trial, but this time for the murder of Charlotte Murray Pace. And this time, this was a capital murder case, and so he was eligible for the death penalty, and that's what they was going for. This is what they wanted. And on October 12, 2004, everybody got their wish. The jury found Derrick guilty of the murder of Charlotte Murray Pace, and they sentenced him to death. And upon hearing his sentence, Derrick literally peed his pants. And I'm really glad that he had that reaction, because maybe, just maybe, he was feeling a little small, tiny piece of fear that his victims felt, knowing that their life was about to be taken away from them. So now that Derrick was sentenced to death, the prosecutors and the families of the other victims decided that he didn't need to go to trial for the murders of the other victims, because they essentially got what they wanted. And since his DNA connected him to all of those murders, they knew that the person who murdered their loved one was going to die. And so that was justice enough for them. And the reason that they didn't try some of the cases together before he ended up getting the death penalty was because if he didn't get the death penalty in the Charlotte Murray Pace case, they were going to try him again for another murder, and hopefully he would get the death penalty there, and they would just keep going down the line until they got this man on death row. And even though his DNA only linked him to 7 victims, they do believe that Derrick is responsible for more murders in the southern Louisiana area, because before he even killed Randy Meebro, there was a woman named Connie Warner in 1992 who was murdered, and her body was found in Baton Rouge. However, they were unable to get any evidence because a hurricane had come and washed all of the evidence away, and they truly believe that he was responsible for Connie's murder as well. And Derrick Todd Lee would end up dying at the age of 47 from heart disease on January 21st, 2016, while he waited his execution. But yeah, y'all, that is all I have for today's case. Thank you all so very much for watching. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe if you like this type of content, and I will see you all in the next one. We never want to focus when I need you to. Just disrespectful. And at some point he would end up never and at some point he would not oh my gosh. And so Derrick ended up feeling very, what he felt like, and he decided to start, what was the inclination in the voice there? Because over the next couple of years, over the course of okay. So in 1981, when Derrick was just 13 years old, he was caught robbing a candy store and burglarizing it. Is that the same thing? I don't know. Hold on. And they 2 kids had left Zachary. No, wait, what? Yes, no, what? And it was here that he decided to elevate his Pete Tomery. What? No. To the point where Detective McDavid, because remember, he was still on probation for being a peeping Tom. And real quick, let me just say this, because what the hell did Tom have going on back in the day? We got tomfoolery, Uncle Tom, peeping Tom. I feel like Tom stayed in some shit. Yes, y'all be making me happy when I see I got a new subscriber. How do you say that? Do you say Baton Rouge or Baton Rouge? And one of those other parishes that brought forward some of their unsolved murders was Zachary. Well, Zachary ain't a parish, is it? I don't know. And while he waited while he was sitting in jail in Louisiana, the